Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Kilger, and this is the Feed and Grain Podcast. First off, thank you so much for listening. Here on the Feed and Grain Podcast, we chat with stakeholders in the feed manufacturing grain handling industries about the industry itself, hopefully mimicking something you might find on a trade show floor if you were to chat with them. Today, our topic is the Institute of Feed Education and Research, better known as IFEEDER. My guests will be Lara Moody, Executive Director of IFEEDER, Steve Lerner, who works at Christensen Hansen Animal Health and Nutrition and is on the board of IFEEDER. We talk about why the feed industry has a charity, what they're working on now, and some ways industry members can help them out. One last bit of housekeeping. If you have a topic or a guest you would think would be good on the podcast, let me know. We have a submission button on the Feed and Grain podcast page where you can send me your ideas, your guest recommendations, or just reach out and let me know how it's going. I look forward to hearing from you. Now, let's get into my chat with Lara and Steve. Well, thank you so much, Lara and Steve, for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I'm really eager to hear about what IFEEDER has kind of going on and what it is in the future. I've been in the industry for 8 years now, and I've covered IFEEDER in every one of them, so I'm happy to learn what's going on. Would you mind telling me a bit about yourselves and how you ended up being involved in IFEEDER and in the feed industry in general?
So, Steve, thanks so much for having us on and helping us spread the word for what IFEEDER is trying to accomplish. I joined IFEEDER just about a year ago now, actually over a year ago now. I previously spent time working for the fertilizer industry, which has a lot of similarities in some ways to the feed industry, given the commoditization of products and some of the proprietary elements of products. But prior to that, I'm actually an ag engineer by training, and livestock is in my blood to start with. Not only am I a horse owner, but I also spent a lot of time doing manure management. So I spent time in the university system doing research and extension around manure management and nutrient management. And so now here I am at IFEEDER and really enjoyed getting to know the feed industry in the last year.
Very happy to be here, Stephen. I've been, happily to say, involved in animal agriculture for 40 years now and counting. Classically trained as an animal scientist and started on an academic career path as a university professor. In 1993, I left the good side to join the dark side and went to work for Merck AgVet, stayed with them through the transition to Mariel for 20 years, and then moved into an area of probiotics for production animals, which falls smack into the feed industry, and believe that is one of the greatest future opportunities to improve efficiency of agriculture by looking at these new biological additives.
Yeah, there's a lot of exciting progress on that front. We'll have to talk to you another time in another podcast about that part of the industry. And Lara, I mean, you went from fertilizer, trained in horse manure fertilizer, to at least a slightly less stinky industry in feed. Even though some of those feed mills in the South during the summer, they get quite ripe.
Well, and trust me, I've been using my new feed contacts to help me with my own competition dressage horses feed intake. So I've been using my new position to gather insights.
Well, actively participating, actively supporting an industry as well. That's always great. Can you tell me a little bit of IFEEDER, and for the people who are listening that might not know much about you, your kind of history, mission, most importantly, why it's essential for the feed industry to have an association like this, an organization like this?
IFEEDER was started in 2009 by the American Feed Industry Association. IFEEDER, we should probably spell it out for folks, is the Institute for Feed Education and Research. And so we are the research and education foundation for the U.S. feed industry. And IFEEDER was established as a way to take on some of the opportunities and issues that the feed industry had outside of the policy and regulatory and trade space that AFIA had traditionally worked in. We just spent the last year putting a strategic plan in place for IFEEDER and revising our mission statement. So our mission statement right now is to advance understanding and trust in a sustainable feed and pet food supply chain through timely research and education. And for us, that's not only a focus on research as you might think about traditional like academic research, like Steve and I were doing when we were in the university systems, but also research that helps us bring together stakeholder needs, identify the gaps in data flow or quantification methodologies for different metrics and indicators, specifically in the food supply chain sustainability space right now, as is relevant to feed. So an expanded scope of what research means, not your traditional academic research that we're talking about here, but really figuring out what gaps we need to fill, what IFEEDER can do to support advancing the industry's sustainability efforts. And I'd like to toss it to Steve and let him talk a little bit about the value of an entity like IFEEDER to the industry.
Yes, Stephen, you asked about why it's essential for our industry to have an organization like this. And as Lara defined IFEEDER, perhaps it's very worthy talking about what we mean when we say the animal feed industry. It might imply that it's an entity, but in fact, it's hundreds of entities, from the very large feed and grain and ingredient suppliers to the very small local feed mills. All of these hundreds, maybe even thousands of entities are involved in animal feed delivery and supply. And there are many issues that face this industry, from consumer demands and consumer concerns to just supply chain concerns. And it's absolutely essential as a collective industry to have the needs addressed centrally, where not one organization would ever have the funding or desire to drive that kind of education or those particular research areas that are good for the collective. So IFEEDER provides that forum, an organization where the key consumer concerns and demands can be evaluated, education programs can be put into place to ensure that our members have good messaging, and then essential research that we can speak about at length provides an opportunity for those who could not do it themselves or would not do it as a collective to benefit from something for the industry based on the efforts of IFEEDER.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We're stronger together than we are separate, right? And it would be impossible for a lot of feed companies to even consider doing research like this. So that's a really good point. Well, the reason we're all here is you guys just had your board of trustees meeting, and you discussed, the main thing was, your discussion was broadening awareness of the value of these research and education initiatives. Can you tell us what you talked about, or is it all behind closed doors? Is it a big secret? Can you?
Yeah, not a big secret. We're actually, as you noted in the discussion, we recognize there's a significant need to broaden the awareness of IFEEDER. We have even limited awareness of IFEEDER within Animal Feed Industry Association's membership. There's a lot of folks that maybe are confused about the missions for AFIA versus the mission for IFEEDER. And so we just see this significant opportunity to get a broader reach and knowledge, not only within the feed sector, but also to our allied stakeholder organizations that are doing work that where feed is relevant. Just as an example, if you're thinking about something like the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef and their new sets of goals and targets that they're working on to achieve in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, some of those elements are clearly linked back to feed. While feed may not be called out within one of their targets or pathways to achieve that target, it's clearly an element of achieving their desired outcome. And so we want to make sure that for all of our stakeholders, where we can be a resource to them, that we can do that. I mentioned our strategic plan and the fact that we kind of renewed our mission statement. And so within that, we also identified some goals for IFEEDER. One of those goals is being a resource that's utilized and recognized as a key point of information, especially in the sustainability space, but others as well, for not only the feed sector, but again, for our kind of peer organizations. And that it could be a Tyson or it could be the National Pork Board, right? It could be the Feed and Grain Association, or along with AFIA using our information, or it could be specific entities within that. So number one, really being a recognized and utilized resource by the industry in the sustainability space. Our second goal is to have research outcomes inform and support a sustainable feed and pet food supply chain. So our starting place for that, and we'll talk about this some, I'm sure, is figuring out where our priorities need to be in that sustainability research and outreach space. That's the second goal. The third goal then is to use that broadened recognition and awareness of IFEEDER to diversify our funding sources. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in this space. The feed industry certainly will benefit from the work that we're doing, but our other stakeholders will benefit from the work we're doing as well. And so how can we bring in additional funders to support the work that we're trying to do? How do we diversify that? Find partnerships, not only getting money from corporate entities or other associations, but also going after, federal agency grant dollars. In which we've done. And so I think finding those opportunities are all a part of us fulfilling our strategic plan. And so I would, those are my thoughts, but Steve, as an industry member who has to engage with these different stakeholders and some of these peer groups, I'm sure he has thoughts on where we serve a role as well for those entities.
If you listen to Lara, and I applaud the development of such a brilliant strategic plan. But then I put on my marketing hat. How do we, as the IFEEDER Board of Trustees, actually create awareness and interest and a what's in it for me among our stakeholders to actually contribute to such a great plan? And that's where this whole idea of marketing comes into play. We garner funding to do research. We garner funding for education products, but we don't think about the millions of dollars we should ask for to market IFEEDER into the space. It would be an inappropriate ask, quite truthfully. So we utilize our membership within IFEEDER and in the broader AFIA group to hopefully be our missionaries into the marketplace to drive awareness of our efforts and to garner support for these initiatives that absolutely, positively, demonstrably will benefit not only the industry, but all the associated industries within the animal food space and animal production space. It's simply good for agriculture, and all those involved in agriculture should be willing to contribute to their mutual benefit. It would make everything easier to do going forward with a clearer structure for how to get things done. And IFEEDER is central to that. So it's about getting the good word out, I guess, in a nutshell.
Feed is such a huge factor in agriculture. I mean, producers get all the glory and the credit, right? They're the guys with out there in the field with the soybean, and they're there with the cow that's going to get. But feed is one of the biggest determining factors in any of that. So it's really nice to hear you guys say how important it is to get that message out. And you talked a little bit about sustainability, which this year I went to IPPE, which AFIA hosts their annual convention as part of that show. And sustainability, man, it became the word on everybody's mouth, didn't it? And so your sustainability roadmap is really interesting to me because, I mean, that's going to be the next big challenge for the industry as a whole, right? Explaining what we're doing to make the environmental impact of feed be less and to make sure our industry goes. So how is the sustainability roadmap? Can you tell me a little bit about how that got started and how it's developing now?
So the sustainability roadmap is really the cornerstone piece for IFEEDER right now relative to our sustainability efforts. So there are certainly other things underway. I think one of the things about feed in the sustainability space, and especially within the food supply chain, is that feed flew under the radar for a long time. The brunt of influence or pressure is just where you were talking about. It's on the producer side. It's on the soybean, corn, crop feedstuffs production side, and it's on the live animal production side. And I think what's so challenging about sustainability in the feed sector is we sit in between those two, and those downstream companies like a Starbucks or a McDonald's or a Nestle that ultimately want and need the information flow relative to feed, it has to flow through us. And we have to get the information from someplace else and then add our piece to it and then send it on down the line. The feed sustainability mire or muck or swamp, I don't know what to call it, but it's a confusing space, right? And there are folks that have tried to touch it at different times and to involve it and to get an effort underway. Companies have certainly done pilots relative to feed, but I think there are challenges, there are complexities in the space. It's not an easy place to work. The first thing we did in our sustainability roadmap effort was just like lay out the stakeholder map. Like, who are all of the influencers? Who's upstream of us? Who's downstream of us? Who do we have to pay attention to? Who do we even call the feed sector? Like, who are the elements within the feed sector? And so in doing that, then we started identifying through research, and by research, I mean doing the entity that we've worked with, doing a lot of online investigation, like going and exploring all the different corporate sustainability reports that are out there, how people are defining sustainability online, what kind of goals and targets are out there, what indicators and metrics are they using? So what are the points that they want to prioritize relative to the materiality of those issues for them? We've pulled together a set of metrics that are relevant to people or societal, planet, i.e. the environment, and then governance. We're currently doing a survey, actually, for members. So timing is good for this podcast to go out. Right now, the survey is open to industry members. We really want to get broader input on those indicators we've identified relative to the importance of those indicators for them and the issues that they have within their organizations. Again, that we can start to prioritize and decide which ones we're going to tackle first or which ones we need to make more prevalent. But then the survey is going to go to a broader group of stakeholders. So anytime you do a materiality assessment, you want to look at not only internally what those issues are, but also look externally. And so we're going to be going out later this month with a call for survey participants to help us in that materiality assessment. So we actually hope to roll the roadmap out in September. It won't be the final one, but it'll be the first time that we put something out there for folks to react to. And we're going to be doing that at our Feed System Sustainability Summit. The Feed System Sustainability Summit is going to be an invitation-only kind of workshop where we really are going to be sitting down with folks who are working within not only the feed sector, but our stakeholders up and down the value chain to identify what we need to catalyze action in this space. So what's needed to move the needle relative to circularity in the feed sector, innovation, regenerative sourcing, talking about things that we do relative to feedstuffs production, and then responsible sourcing, which is, of course, important to our downstream folks. And so in that space, we're going to be bringing those folks together. We're going to kick it off with some webinar series this summer. So we'll have more information coming out about that. But it just so happens we've also got a call out for sponsorships, and we've got our location host actually on the call with us. So I don't know, Steve, maybe you want to say a little bit about why you see value in the summit relative to our sustainability efforts.
As Stephen said, sustainability is on everyone's mind. I wish there was a beautiful, clear, concise definition of what everyone meant by sustainability. In my simple mind, we have to do something that enables us to feed the 8 to 10 billion people that'll be among us by 2050, and to do that in a manner that enables us to sustain not only the planet, but the people on the planet going forward. And Christian Hansen, the company that I work for, has been identified for the last 4 years as the most sustainable biotech company in the world. In fact, Christian Hansen has been around for 147 years, involved in sustainability, like converting milk into cheese, which was the first effort back in 1874. It's a sustainable practice because you're preserving the nutrients in milk. Today, I'm involved in the production of probiotics for animals that improves the capacity of them to efficiently convert feed into body. And the more carbon and hydrogen you convert to animal, the less methane you put back out into the air. It's a very sustainable notion. So when speaking to the powers that be at Christian Hansen, it seemed only logical and a great choice for us to be the host of this summit where these topics and others around sustainability measures can be discussed by the experts and then disseminated back into our industry to the benefit for all. It simply was the right choice for us.
And I should say, I was remiss in saying this in the beginning, but partnerships are really important for us. And so not only are the sponsors we're looking for great partners, but we're also working with the World Wildlife Fund. They bring a different perspective. They bring a different set of stakeholder engagements, but they're very invested and interested in advancing the sustainable feed space, not only through their regenerative ag work they do on feedstuff production, but also in advancing and catalyzing our desired outcome relative to feed and in the food supply chain. We're looking forward to that summit and working with World Wildlife Fund on that effort.
Yeah, that's great. And it's good to hear you're working with groups like the World Wildlife Fund because, well, it's always been, feed hasn't always been the best at telling our own story. And as we all know, if you don't, especially in this modern day and age, people are going to tell it for you, and it probably won't be the version you like. So, especially with, let's face it, 99.9% of the U.S. population having no idea about anything in the feed manufacturing industry. So I really am happy that you guys are doing that. And of course, come back when you launch your program in this September, and we'll be happy to talk to you again about it and what's going on.
We'd love to share insights from that discussion.
Yeah, definitely. Please do. And just for everyone to know, all of IFEEDER's website and everything will be linked down in the show notes, so you'll be able to go down there and click on it right away and get more involved. That's sustainability. What kind of other projects or initiatives is IFEEDER working on at the moment?
Yeah, we've got several other projects underway. It's handy. We've got Steve on with us as well. He's actually chairs IFEEDER's research committee. That's one of the reasons I wanted him to come on so he could help talk about some of the projects. And I think just briefly, I'll touch on a couple and then I'll pass it to Steve. One of the projects that we got funded last year was a joint collaboration with the Nature Conservancy and DMI, so Dairy Management Inc. In that effort, we're looking at strategies and additives to reduce enteric methane on dairies. And so we're looking at a pilot, but then also IFEEDER's piece is doing an economic assessment of the use of those additives and strategies such that we can help USDA inform some of their incentive programs to support use of those on the farm. We also have been a longtime supporter of the Clear Center, and the Clear Center is based at UC Davis, and they do kind of work that intersects with animals and the environment and working with stakeholders to understand the complexities in more layman's terms, right, for some of the big issues that we have for the day. And then we also support the NAMI, or the North American Meat Institute's Protein Pact. Those are two ways that we're able to do some of our messaging to consumers without IFEEDER having to directly carry that lift, because it is so important that we reach that broader audience. But then we have some other projects that maybe you wouldn't drop right into the sustainability bucket. I'll let Steve talk a little bit about some of those.
The first one I'd love to mention is the African swine fever decontamination study. As you may appreciate, it's extremely important for us here in the U.S. to prevent entry of African swine fever virus into U.S. feed mills, because once that virus is in a mill, it will remain in the environment for a long period of time and pose a tremendous risk. So IFEEDER and other industry partners are providing funding to the Swine Health Information Center, who organized a study to evaluate methods for cleaning and for disinfecting feed manufacturing facilities. This project was determined to find optimal methods for disinfecting feed manufacturing equipment that was really not designed to be disinfected. And as you can imagine, we don't ever do testing with the actual African swine fever virus itself. Instead, they use three different surrogates: Seneca virus A, and then the PRRS virus and the PED virus, that will allow us to determine the efficacy of cleaning this infection if it would ever to come to prevent risk. That's the first. The other project I'd like to speak about is one that seems mundane. It's the nutrient requirements update to the NRC recommendations for swine feeding. But we can all appreciate that the better you understand the true nutrient requirements of today's production animals, in this case swine, it gives you a great opportunity to improve feed efficiency, to reduce the cost of feed, and certainly have a positive impact on profitability. And these are the big drivers. Part of them are a sustainability message around feed efficiency. So the NRC requirements were last updated in 2012, and the new effort is to re-engage and have a standard set of recommendations for the formulation of commercial and research diets for swine here in the U.S. And this is done alongside the National Pork Board, the United Soybean Board, and the Corn Growers Association that will help us be involved in this project. We're still looking for funding, so if any listeners want to contribute, please contact Lara. She'd be happy to arrange that opportunity.
Steve, the big takeaway for us is we carry out this important work in these projects oftentimes in partnerships, right? We don't do any of this on our own. And there are a lot of groups out there to work with that are pursuing areas in the same space. And so we love being able to partner with a variety of different organizations.
And if I can just add, it comes back to the initial reason for supporting IFEEDER is these two projects would never be done by any individual industry ally or member. It would have to be done by a group like ours that would do something to benefit the collective. And of course, we involve partners for the funding and the broad base that the opportunity represents.
No, exactly. It also, the partnerships shows once again how connected we are really to the industry and how important the feed section is to the other players. With things like the African swine fever, that's something that so far we haven't had we haven't had issues with in the U.S. But if it happens, we need to know what to do, or that's going to be.
I hope you're touching wood when you say that, Stephen.
And it's so important to have that kind of research that you wouldn't be able to do on your own. University wouldn't be able to do on their own. And those kind of things are, like you said, the reason that something like IFEEDER is really important for us. Why IFEEDER is important for us. So speaking of IFEEDER being kind of important, you guys just got new board leadership and trustees. What's the hot goss about them? What can you tell me about these new members?
We try and keep diversity on the IFEEDER board across the industry sector so that we have all the different groups represented, and we never turn over the whole board at one time. So we just brought on 4 new board members, one being our new chairman. And so we actually end up with the past chair of AFIA always becomes the chair of IFEEDER. And that way we have some continuity through IFEEDER. Mike Schuster, who is the vice president of sales at Leidig, is coming on to be the chair. He has been a longtime supporter of IFEEDER because of his work with the Equipment Manufacturing Committee for AFIA. We support a scholarship fund for them. We both combined together have about $21,000 go out to support 7 scholarships across the U.S. annually. And so he's been a longtime supporter of IFEEDER. But we also, again, with an eye towards diversity, we're bringing on Scott Lubin he's the vice president of feed at Ag State out of Iowa. So it's nice to have somebody who's kind of closer to the boots on the ground relative to the sales of feed, going out to support our producers. Paul Phillips is the president of MaxiLift and Southwest Agriplastics. Again, bringing in somebody from the manufacturing and production side, equipment manufacturing and production sides. Great to have him on. He was a board member for IFEEDER when it first got started. So he knows a little bit about our history, and he's somebody who has a real passion for IFEEDER. So we're glad to have him coming back onto the board. And then Gisele Santos-Bin. She is the head of sales management for animal nutrition at BASF North America. BASF, huge player in the sustainability space across all of production agriculture. I just saw a note out today where they're the first ag company to have carbon footprint for every single one of their products. So it's great, given that that's IFEEDER's sustainability is kind of our focus area. It's great to have somebody like Gisele who comes with that knowledge base into the board as well. That's the new board. Well, 4 newest members to the board, and we meet 3 to 4 times a year. And I tap into these guys for various things throughout the year, like reaching out to Steve to join me today, which has been great.
Yeah, and I'm happy that Steve was able to come join us. In part because I'm just always happy to see another Steve. We're our own little club. Once again, just so much important things that IFEEDER is doing. And we mentioned a few ways to get involved. Obviously, you could fund that research if you wanted to. If you have some extra cash in your pocket, you go ahead and just fund all that.
Bring it on.
But also the survey coming up and a bunch of other things. And what other ways can members of the industry get involved with IFEEDER? What can they do to help out?
One of the greatest things that we can have people do is just help us carry the message, help us share who IFEEDER is. If you don't know it, go visit ifeeder.org, learn our mission statement, see some of the types of projects that we're doing, and be a messenger for us, right? That's really important. When project opportunities come up, when you're meeting with a group of stakeholders and they have an idea for something that you think is beneficial, remember IFEEDER. Put us in there as a partner. Introduce us into some of those conversations as we look to broaden the awareness of other stakeholders. And in fact, we have members that are doing that, but that's really an important way. Word of mouth is huge when you're thinking about trying to build a brand for an organization. And of course, you can always donate, right? So ifeeder.org, individual donations are always welcome. I will put my email out there. It's lmoody, LMOODY at afia.org. You can always reach out and contact me if you want to learn more about any of the projects that we have underway, what kind of funding needs we have for all of those projects. I'd love to talk to you. We're always taking in general funds, general contributions. If you just want to make a general corporate contribution, those are important to us as well. Like I mentioned, for example, we use those dollars to help fund the scholarships, right, that we have at 7 universities across the U.S. Lots of opportunities. If you're expressly interested in any one of those, again, reach out, learn more. I'd love to talk with you.
That's great advice. I would encourage anyone in the industry to get involved. And it's something to support the industry, right? It's helping to support you. So reach out and get involved with AFIA and IFEEDER and all those great organizations that are really there just to help you. All right. Well, thank you so much, Laura. Thank you so much, Steve, for taking the time to talk to me today. It was great chatting. And hopefully we can catch up again in a couple months about everything else that IFEEDER has going on.
Absolutely. We'd love to give you a download after the summit.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we will talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye. Okay.